have here. I am really, really excited to be having this conversation. It was put together a little bit last minute. I have just been really feeling this last couple of days this week that I want more spiritual nourishment and Torah learning and preparation going into Shavuot. And thinking about some really big themes. What does it mean to receive the Torah? What does it mean to be a people that didn't just survive Egypt and anti-Semitism, but is ready to go into Sinai and into something aspirational? What do we take from the scroll of Ruth, which is one of the most profound books or stories in the Hebrew Bible? And I couldn't think of a better person to invite to learn some Torah with me, teach me some Torah, than my friend and teacher, Rabbi Joe Wolfson. So Rabbi Joe, I'm going to call you Joe, we're friends, but everyone should call him Rabbi Joe because he has he's earned the title.
Your
I'll just
original
say,
podcast buddy, you mean?
yeah, I'm going to give the full intro. So beyond the professional stuff, Joe and his wife Corinne were the JLIC rabbinic couple at NYU in Lower Manhattan. We connected then. And during COVID, when things were scary and confusing, we decided to actually start a podcast. We had no idea what we were doing. We started learning Torah together. How long did we keep that going, Joe?
About half a year, I think.
Half a year. Okay, that was good. That was
Can
good.
still find it. Downtown Drash. Some good stuff.
Downtown Drash. We can add this to the show notes. But right now, Rabbi Joe does many things. I'll mention the two primary areas that he does. He is the rabbi of a beautiful community for young Jews, many Olim in Tel Aviv, and he can tell us about that community. I have been very privileged to be part of their WhatsApp chat, so I get to see the daily activity of that community, how much it's really an unbelievable community in terms of being part of Israeli fabric and Israeli society. And you just had a 27-hour flight, right?
Yes. You. I come to you from the African bush.
Okay, great. So you're in South Africa right now doing what?
I'm excited to be teaching and learning Torah in Cape Town with the Morasha community over Shavuot, and I've come a few days early to spend some time preparing for Shavuot in some beautiful African bushes and parks that allow me to step back a little bit from the day-to-day trenches.
Amazing. Before we jump into Shavuot and Ruth, day-to-day trenches, can you give us a little window into what, I know it's like a huge question, but if someone didn't know your community and wanted to kind of get to know it and also understand this moment, I know, huge question, but I think we should get to know you better.
Very simply, I have the huge privilege, together with my wife Corinne, to be the rabbi of a wonderful community, the JLIC community in Tel Aviv, which has as its core many Olim, primarily in their 20s and their 30s, recent immigrants to Israel. But it has become something broader and bigger than that. We have many people who were born in Israel or grew up in Israel involved in it now, or many people who have moved from non-English speaking parts of the diaspora. We have Ukrainian and Turkish and even Kurdish and Spanish members of our community, and South American. And beyond having a great time together and celebrating Jewish life together, our vision for a community is one where members are not simply receivers and consumers, but where the community is a force and a power for lots of important projects, and there is no shortage of them around us. Even in normal times, there is always so much to attend to, so many needs, so many places where we can try and add something positive to it. And as you know all too well, Mijal, we are still very much in a moment where there is a ton of need. And also very beautiful things as well, very much post October 7th as well.
And Rabbi Joe, you might take it for granted because you're living this, but I'll just say for me, waking up each morning, checking the WhatsApp group, and one day it's like I'm cooking for reservist families who wants to come help. A different day, it's we are going, God forbid, to a funeral. Who wants to come and pay respects, or to a shiva house? Or you'd had like beautiful partnerships with a secular kibbutz and like really being there for each other. Or the members of your community literally ran a whole network of bringing food and activities to evacuated families from like the north who were living in Tel Aviv. Like I can keep talking about it, and I think many of us living in the States and other places might just not have a sense of the need, and also what I would call is the absolute beauty that I see in your community and in so many parts of Israeli society. So thank you for letting me be a little bit part of that. It means a lot to me. And now we'll do some Torah learning. So I know, Rabbi Joe, you WhatsApped me right before this, and you're like, I'm going to go somewhere else. So I was going to talk to you about the Book of Ruth. Do you still want to do Ruth, or are we going to talk about
Oh,
Shavuot more
absolutely,
broadly?
absolutely. No. We are in Megillat Ruth. Yes, all about Ruth.
Okay. Amen. So great. So Shavuot, which is a holiday we're celebrating very soon, according to the rabbis, it's a holiday in which we receive the Torah. We have revelation at Sinai. And classically, we read the scroll of Ruth, which is one of the books in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. And Rabbi Joe, if we had to give a bit of like a summary of the Book of Ruth, how would we describe it? We're going to
It's
help
a
each other
very
here.
simple, it's a very simple story, or at least on the surface, it is. It's a short story, just 4 chapters, about a family who leave Israel in a time of famine, the family of Elimelech and Naomi, and who almost perish totally in the fields of Moab where they have moved to. And it is the return of the sole surviving member of the family, the matriarch Naomi, along with her 2 daughters-in-law, but it's only one of the daughters-in-law that makes it the whole way, and her name is Ruth, or Ruth in English. And it is the story of how they return penniless and broken and bereft of their family to a land which one of them had abandoned, and the other one was a total foreigner to, and not a neutral kind of foreigner, but a foreigner from Moab. Moab being one of the great biblical adversaries of Israel, who infamously do not give Am Yisrael bread or water when they pass through their lands in the desert on the way to Canaan. And it's the story of how, starting from this nadir, this despair, that actually something beautiful and true comes, and it comes through the acts of kindness that they perform for one another.
Let me go a little bit to despair, and I want to just like open up the texture a little bit more. There's layers of despair here and layers of darkness. We are, by the way, Rabbi Joe, we're about to read the book of Bamidbar in the wilderness. Bamidbar is like in the desert, but we often say in the wilderness. And I keep thinking that there's something, I don't know, this year I keep thinking there's something about the book of Ruth that is itself in like a sort of wilderness, like in a very tough period. So it's located in a time that classically is known as, in Hebrew, as Tkufat HaShoftim, the time of the judges. Do you know off the top of your mind what year that would be, like, BCE? It's a long time ago. Right after the,
Yeah.
yeah. No, go for it.
One thing to get used to, which is a bit tricky in Tanakh, is that chronological time is not
Right.
spread equally over the amount of pages. So you have some quite long books which take place over very short times, and you have other books which take place over very long times. So the Book of Shoftim is many hundreds of years, multiple
300
generations.
Years.
Yeah. And it is the first generations of Israel's settlement in the land and of trying to put roots down and build a society. And of
Right.
course, the critical thing for our purposes is to say that it's a book which starts off with hope, but which pretty soon shows us the disintegration of Israelite society.
Right. So the book of Judges, I recently learned with Rabbi Alex Israel. So we described how the book of Judges is a time in which we don't have a monarchy. We have like a loose confederation of tribes. There's a lot of like enemy invasion and like enemies that continue like coming in and attacking and invading. There's idolatry widespread. There's sexual immorality. There's the kind of behavior that reminds us of like Sodom and Gomorrah in terms of people really treating each other terribly. There's civil war. Jews slaughtering each other. It's a very, very dark time. I don't know if you learned this, growing up. I remember in fifth grade, literally our teacher creating that cycle, like in the whiteboard of the Book of Judges, like the Jews basically they mess up, they get punished, enemies invade, then a hero rises, things are good for a couple of years, then it's downhill again. So
I
that's
went
like
to a
a little
school
bit
which thought it was very frum, so we didn't learn any Tanakh. So I only learned this stuff
okay.
after I was 18. But yeah,
Okay,
you had a
very.
good education.
Yes, well, we'll talk about that a different time. But basically, like the despair is almost like systemic. Government is bad.
Yeah,
People don't have trust in leadership, and the beginning of the story of Ruth is a famine. So you have a natural disaster that comes in on top of like a very socially thin environment.
yeah, that's right. But of course, and we're going to tease this out, immediately the question that confronts us when we look at the Megillat Ruth, is why is it not in the Book of Shoftim? If it takes place during the time of the Shoftim, and Shoftim itself is an amalgam of many, many different stories, I often tell my students as sort of like a simple trick. If there's a story that in Tanakh, in the Bible, that you're not sure where it takes place, odds on it takes place in the Book of Shoftim. Right?
Hmm.
Many of the most famous stories of Devorah and Barak and Gidon and Sisera and the terrible civil war with Binyamin and Pilegesh Begiva, etc. They're all in the Book of Shoftim. So why this story of Ruth and Noami, which takes place during the time of Shoftim, as it's announced in its opening verse, why is it not simply a part of the Book of Shoftim? And the answer is really simple, because the answer is that it points in a totally different direction to everything else in the Book of Shoftim. It stands in contrast to. So should we get into some of the details?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm still thinking
Okay.
about the answer that you just gave. So this is basically going to be like reading against the grain of all the other trends in the Book of Judges.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to start with the following. This is something that I've only really thought about properly this year. Before we
In your
get to
flight
Ruth,
right now. Just kidding.
well, last week. Before we
Go
get
for
to
it.
Ruth, there is Elimelech. And Elimelech, the head of this family, leaves the country, leaves Israel in the time of famine. And he goes to the fields of Moab. And there he is obliterated. There he dies, and his sons, Machlon and Chilion, die. And clearly, if we have any sort of sensitivity to how the Tanakh gives its messages, this is a punishment. This is a punishment for leaving Eretz Yisrael. And that's kind of a strange thing, because he is not alone in leaving Eretz Yisrael in a time of famine. In fact, a figure no less than Avraham Avinu takes his family away from Eretz Yisrael almost as soon as he has arrived in Israel, and takes them down to Egypt on account of a famine. And the great medieval Parshanim, commentators, they discuss this. And some see it as a terrible thing. That's the opinion of the Ramban, that he should have had faith. And others see it as a perfectly justifiable thing. Lo somchin al hanes. We don't rely on a miracle. That's the position of the Radak. But either way, even according to the opinion that Abraham does sins by leaving Israel, he certainly survives to tell the tale. Why is Elimelech treated so much more harshly than Abraham? And
Right.
I think I've got a good answer.
Okay. Wait,
Okay.
sorry, I missed the sentence. You have a good what?
I think there's a critical distinction here between Elimelech and Abraham.
Okay.
Now we're going to need to draw on some midrashic traditions, but I think they are rooted. Abraham, at that early stage of his career, is really just an individual with a family, but he doesn't have a community and he doesn't have a people. He is making decisions for his family. Elimelech, in the reading of Chazal, of the rabbis, is someone with the real potential for leadership. They do a pun on his name. Why is he called Elimelech? Because he says, Elai HaMalchut. The kingship should come to me. The Gemara even says that he is a descendant of the great figure Nachshon ben Aminadav, the one who walks into the sea before it splits. He is somebody who can stand in the breach. He is somebody who Am Yisrael, in their moments of despair, look to, and they say, this one, he can save us, right? He can get us out of this. We can put our hope on him. And what a gut punch! What a huge loss that Am Yisrael feel when they see Elimelech and his family abandoning them. Elimelech is something is expected of leaders that is not expected of individuals, although perhaps there's something which should be expanded. But we are not allowed to despair of the people, and that's what Elimelech does. Elimelech despairs of the people being able to turn the corner from the darkness of the world that they are in Sefer Shoftim, and he gives up on them.
So you're making a distinction that while Abraham in Genesis was an individual who took his family away due to famine, Elimelech is very different because he's a very symbolic figure that everyone looks at as a leader, and he abandons.
And they put
you
their
know what
hope
else?
in him.
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking of, you mentioned that both of them, you were contrasting, Abraham and Elimelech, and saying both of them left because of famine. But there's another big distinction, which is that Abraham left the land of Israel. Elimelech left the land of Israel, but most importantly, he left the Jewish people. Right? Like
right.
Abraham, as a family, doesn't leave people behind. He's just going, right? But here, Elimelech, it's almost like he's at the moment that is hardest for the Jewish people, he has the resources to walk away, and he doesn't intertwine his fate with them, with theirs.
Now, I want to make a point that before we criticize him for this, actually, the challenge, the great difficulty of sticking with Am Yisrael is something that the Tanakh, the Bible, attests to. That there are many leaders throughout biblical history who say, oh my God, really, do I have to stick with this people? There's this amazingly evocative verse of the prophet Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. Mi yitneni malon ochim bamidbar. Who would give me a guest house in the desert? Ve'ezva etami, and I will leave my people. I'll go away from them. And we see other stories with Moshe and with Hosea and others, meaning we're a hard people, right? And there is so much that we can tear our hair out about us. But the actual act of abandonment, that the Tanakh in the story of Megillat Ruth cannot forgive.
It's also interesting because the abandonment that we see here, it's not, I don't know if this would make a difference, but it's not described as abandonment because of the people's bad behavior. It's described as abandonment because they are suffering terrible misfortune, right? There's a famine. And that's right. Are you reading it differently?
Well, I would, in this sense, read it through the prism of the Book of Shoftim. Right.
Interesting.
Famously, the Book of Ruth opens with the slightly strange phrase. It doesn't say "Vayihi b'mei hashoftim." It was in the days of the judges. It says "Vayihi b'mei shvot hashoftim," which is often translated as "it was in the days when the judges judged," which is classically read to be this was a people that judged its leaders and a leadership which judged its people. There was a breakdown
leadership
of
is
trust.
being judged. Yes.
Yes. A breakdown of trust between the two elements, between the two parts.
And not to get too in the nose here, but nearly every single poll that we look at, putting aside anyone's personal views, that no one knows what they are, but just looking descriptively, every single poll that comes out of Israel right now shows a very significant number of Israeli Jews having lost tremendous trust in its political leadership.
I will say, so a lot of what I'm sharing with you has been through the very enjoyable experience recently of discovering a commentary on Megillat Ruth, written a bit less than 100 years ago.
Is that the one you sent me?
Of all places. It is. That's right. It's called Nahalat Yosef.
Okay.
And as I read it this year, that he wrote in the city that I live in 90 or so years ago, the relevance of it for our current moment feels overpowering.
What's the name of the author?
Rabbi Yosef Zev Lipowitz.
Hmm.
He was a leading student of the great yeshiva of Slobodka in Europe. And Slobodka had this very interesting and beautiful relationship to Israel and to Zionism. And they famously founded the yeshiva in Hebron in the 1920s, which was the victims of the 1929 Hebron massacre. But they also had a little branch in Tel Aviv, which he was the head of. He and his wife had a little pension, like a bed and breakfast in Tel Aviv, and their front living room was a salon for all of the religiously inclined intellectuals of Tel Aviv in the 1920s
So
and 30s.
do you feel like a biographical alignment? The same
Ah,
name,
we should.
the same
I,
Tel
I,
Aviv, an
I,
intellectual salon.
I should be zocher to be sit at the feet of someone of that stature. But I do believe, and this comes back to our original podcast together, Mijal. I do believe that it's extremely powerful to learn Torah that is written in the place in which one lives, to understand that there were people who lived on the streets and in the neighborhoods that we inhabit, whether one is talking about Tel Aviv or New York or places in Europe or Yerushalayim, of course. Can't say it about everywhere, but for so many places where great Torah has been written, to learn that Torah in that place is something very, very empowering. I find Torah of the place to be something that really, really speaks to me.
Yeah, yeah. How did you come across this book?
I came across it originally. There is a lovely, excellent book I recommend to anyone with interest in this called Between Slobodka and Berlin, by Hillel Goldberg, who's a really interesting scholar. And it's a study of what he calls transition figures, people who lived in both worlds, in the world of Eastern Europe, but also in the world of Berlin, the University of Berlin, most of whom moved to America. And they were of neither. They were outsiders to both worlds. So he has a chapter in there on Rabbi Yosef Zev Lipowitz, and I decided to follow up the trail, and it's very, very rewarding.
So give us the Torah you're really thinking about this year. Tel Aviv Torah for these difficult times.
Okay, well look, we've
Or in
shared
the
the
Book of
first
Ruth.
point. I'll give 2 points, both within the first chapter, in addition to this first point, which we have just shared. We can better understand Ruth, the character, the individual, by the contrast to Elimelech, which we've just discussed. Where Elimelech gives up on the people, Ruth has faith in a people that she doesn't know. Firstly, through attachment to an individual. Amech, Ami, your people are my people, she says. People who she has no biological connection with, certainly no affinity, no shared history. And where Elimelech said, this people are not my people, she says, this people are my people. Ruth is the anti-Elimelech. The most famous line of Ruth, of the whole Megillah, is the one that I'm touching on, is where Naomi, her mother-in-law, says, look, I've got nothing for you. I can't keep you here. I can't provide for you. And Ruth says, I'm not listening to you. She says, Ka'asher telechi elech, where you go, I go. Ka'asher talini alin, where you lie down, I will lie down. Amecha mi, your people are my people. Elokayach Elokai, your God is my God. Only death will separate between us. And it's this beautiful, unparalleled line of devotion, of sticking with someone. It becomes sort of the template for Giyur, for conversion. There's so much to say about it. I just want to say one thing about it that I've really been thinking about this year. That line is said on a dusty road somewhere between Moab and Bethlehem, and there is no one whatsoever there to witness it other than the single person to whom it's being addressed. what becomes this sort of most iconic act of devotion and of chesed, of deep kindness, which we haven't mentioned, but we should say, will eventually lead to David HaMelech. David HaMelech is the offspring, several generations later, of Ruth, and the husband that she finds, Boaz. This line which changes history, this line which brings Am Yisrael to a brighter future, that line is not said with any audience. There's a Taylor Swift song, which my daughters like, I quite like as well. It's actually about the UK, about the Lake District. A red rose broke through iced over ground, and no one was around to tweet about it. Right? We live in a world where beauty almost only exists if there's someone to tweet about it. And I think there's something so powerful and important to take to heart in that we don't need a big audience. We don't need to shake the world and have everybody looking at us. It is these small acts between individuals, which are often done with no expectation of reward or of praise. That's actually what gets a people out of the rut in which it is stuck, out of the setting of its sun. And here I'm kind of paraphrasing a passage in the lovely Sefer, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. It is these simple acts of kindness, not ones which shake the world, between simple people, between you and I, between regular individuals. That is what takes a people to its next stage. That's what gets us over the darkness.
And
The darkness
Rabbi
of the
Joe,
Book of Shoftim, darkness of now. Yeah.
No, one thing that we've had our own back and forth about this, you
We
and
have.
I, thinking about this political moment, and what you've offered to me is that this approach, let me try to say this and you tell me if you agree or not. You've told me that for you, this is not just a way of giving us comfort or a way of, giving us an illusion of control, but that it is actually a political theory of change that says, small actions done when no one else is watching, right? They end up becoming the political stepping stones that eventually here lead to the Davidic dynasty, eventually to the Messiah, to redemption. And they shouldn't be, the way that I understood you is that sometimes we think of, I'm going to give my own gloss, okay? That sometimes we think of acts of kindness as separate from like political or national or collective action. There's like the nice things that we do to make people feel better. And then there's like the way that we are engaged in politics. And you've offered this as a way to think, not just that acts of kindness are political. By political, I mean they change reality, they bring towards redemption, but that they might be the only way to actually think about going from despair to redemption.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the philosophy which I live by. It's the one which we try to model. I think it's true in the text always, but especially in Megillat Ruth, which is the bridge between a world of darkness and despair, exemplified by the Book of Judges, to a brighter future where history is moving again in the direction in which it's supposed to. It's a deeply feminine book. It's a book without wars. It's a book of the simple people treating one another with deep kindness and devotion, which is what moves Jewish history forward. And I think it's true in our own lives. It's what I try to live by in our world in Israel today. And part of the reason why I think it's hard for people to hear this today is because we live in a time where headlines and hot takes and retweets and virality and the news cycle are just so ever present. And what we often don't realize is that diminishes our agency so much that we're responding, with our, sometimes I think of it almost quite physically. Almost the only joint of our body that we're using is our thumb to scroll and to That's our way of interacting with the world. But how much is actually achieved by that?
Well, so so I hear the critique. I don't agree 100%, and you and I have kind of like also had this discussion over the years. I do think that we are living in a world that whether we like it or not, things, you know, do happen because of social media. But I actually want to ask a different question. You said the Book of Ruth is a book without wars, and I think that matters here, and I want to name it. Like I was reading this morning, I forgot which poll came out that something with like the Voice of the People, President Herzog's project, in which they surveyed thousands of Jews around the world. And in terms of young Jews, maybe something like 80% of them, their main concern is anti-Semitism. I think that, and I'm sharing this like genuinely, I want to hear what you have to say here. I think part of what's hard is that when we feel besieged and we feel like there's enemies all around us, it almost feels like dealing with that or feeling outraged over that. It almost feels like, well, what is this small act of kindness that no one is seeing? How is that going to actually help? This kind of like catastrophic environment that could be happening around us. So I think that that's like a different, maybe generous way of understanding. It's not only about the fact that we live in a produced reality where we're always acting for other people, which is really hard. I think it's also just feeling, I'll speak for myself, like the moments that I feel a little bit like helpless in light of geopolitics. And yes, there's an impulse towards small acts of kindness, but there's also almost like a little fear, like this is very nice, but it does nothing with this other very big, overwhelming thing. I don't know if you've thought about that.
You're totally right in terms of we on the anniversary of October 7th, we did these sort of small reflective groups, and one of the prompts for people to ask was, "What do you feel you've lost over the last year?" And I said that one of the things I feel I've lost is that back in our New York days, when you and I were working together, and Yamim K'tikunam, the days as in the good old days, it felt that I really didn't need to choose between being a super proud Jew and leading our wonderful Jewish community, and being deeply involved in New York and everyone in the neighborhood. And something that has felt so hard and painful has been sort of feeling that the anti-Semitism which you reference has sort of closed our world in a certain sense, has reduced the avenues through which we can act and live and create. In that way, and I don't say this in any bragging way at all, chas v'shalom, in that way I feel very lucky to be in Israel. I feel it's to be much easier because I have around me so many wonderful people who I can get to know, who I can do that. I don't need. It sounds so counterintuitive, right? Because we've got sirens and we've got hostage families close to us, but I don't need to be thinking. Anti-Semitism doesn't sort of blinker me in the way in which I feel it probably would for me, and maybe it is for friends in the diaspora. I will say, and here I depart a little bit from the classical reading of Ruth, I actually don't use the word chesed in my own work
Can you translate
so
that?
much.
Chesed, usually we use it for loving
Yeah,
kindness. So how would you read
yes.
it?
Now, I don't mean to diminish or denigrate the beauty of the idea of chesed. I'm not making a philosophical argument here. I'm making a practical, maybe you would say political, a community organizing point here. Chesed doesn't do the work for me that I want it to do as I run a community and as we envisage projects, because chesed is understood to be altruistic, and altruism is not really a very good motivator for people. It's something that a really good pious person, they'll be altruistic. I want something that's a bit harder, a bit sharper. Another problem with the idea of chesed is that people think it's one way, it's one directional, right? I'm doing you a favor, I'm doing you a kindness, and what I have seen, what I know to be the case, is that being involved in this sort of work really deeply, it's totally two-directional, and if anything, the greatest recipients are the people who, on the surface, are the ones doing the work. You mentioned at the start some of our projects. Over the last few weeks, we've had a simple project, but a beautiful project of we have a private chef who we know and we're friends with out visiting from America, and we got 30 sous chefs and delivery people and shoppers from our community, and we set up not a soup kitchen, we set up a high-end cooking station,
Mm.
and for all of the hostage families we've gotten to know and number of widows who've lost their husbands in the war who live near us, we cooked several hundred meals over the course of 2 weeks. Now, you can call that kindness if you want, but my point is for the people who are involved in that, looking and having this as sort of a frame for our actions, it provides so much agency. It allows us to feel that we are actors, we are doing something. It reduces that sense of helplessness. Yush is the Hebrew word, that sense of
Despair.
despair.
Right. So what you're offering is almost like a reframe. I don't think you're giving up on the idea of chesed, of loving kindness. I think you're just acknowledging that sometimes it's used in a way that is softer, that pretends like loving kindness is altruistic, and you're saying that your version of it is one in which you do it not just because you're helping someone else, but you realize that it will shape you in return. And one of the benefits of it is this sense of, like you said, of being agents in the world and being changed yourself as you're doing it.
Yeah.
There's actually a
Yeah.
quote. There's this Catholic priest, Paulo Freire, who I love quoting because he was like a Marxist theologian. So it's good to quote him in unexpected ways. But he wrote a lot about poor people in Brazil, like in like the very dirt poor. And for him, they needed to become free, and they needed to achieve a sense of agency. And he described the process as the moment in which you stop seeing yourself as the object of history and you become the subject of history. And it seems to me a little bit that you are arguing that chesed is one of the key conduits to going from being objects to being subjects of history. And going back to the Book of Ruth, I mean, she gives herself over completely to her mother-in-law at her most vulnerable. And she ends up, I'm not saying we see this always in real life, like, in the world that we see the clear, clear reward, but she ends up becoming the, how do we say it in English? Imashal Malchut, matriarch of monarchy. Like she ends up becoming the ancestor of King David and the Messianic dynasty.
Can I leave you with one more piece from Nachalat Yosef?
Yeah, but you also have to quote that Russian literature that you love. So you have to quote both.
Vasily Grossman.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let me try and.
Do you want me to find it? I have it somewhere.
I'm sure I can find it.
It's probably in our. It's actually in our WhatsApp back and forth. I sent it.
It is. Can I come off the recording? Will it carry on recording if I?
No, I'll just give it to you. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere.
Okay, read it for me in your best Russian accent.
I can't do that, but here, 1 second. I don't know if I ever told you, I ended up buying the book because you recommended it, but I could never get into it. This is
glad you've got it in front of you.
Well, no, I have the passage, not the book. The book is called Life and Faith by Vasily Grossman, which was a sort of like masterpiece describing which war in Russia? One war.
So he was a journalist on the front lines, on the Soviet front lines during World War II, and he reported on the Battle of Stalingrad, which was this devastating battle. And he writes this book after the war. It's a huge book in the tradition of Russian writing. I mean, it's a conscious sort of reference to War and Peace. My version of it has a 7-page character index at the back to give you a sense of how big it is. The famous image of the book, which got the book banned by the KGB, was that at Stalingrad, Hitler hands the sword of tyranny to Stalin. And he's also carrying on with this idea that sort of Tolstoy begins in War and Peace, which is that it's not the quote-unquote great men of history, the Shoftim, if you like, who
Right,
will
not the
actually
big
determine
political
the course of...
leaders.
Exactly. It's the relationship between individuals. So I've got the quote. Shall I read it?
You don't trust my
Here is the
accent?
one.
Ouch.
The quote has made itself onto many of my source sheets over the years. But yes, Bavakasha, go for it,
No, no,
Mijal.
no, no. Go for it. You should go for it. You should go. Your British
Okay.
accent is better than my
Well, it's not a Russian
Spanish
accent.
one. Yeah.
If I tried to do a Russian accent, I would spoil the beauty of it. I have seen that it is not man who is impotent in the struggle against evil, but the power of evil that is impotent in the struggle against man. The powerlessness of kindness, of senseless kindness, is the secret of its immortality. It can never be conquered. The more stupid, the more senseless, the more helpless it may seem, the vaster it is. Evil is impotent before it. Human history is not the battle of good struggling to overcome evil. It is a battle fought by a great evil struggling to crush a small kernel of human kindness. But if what is human in human beings has not been destroyed even now, then evil will never conquer.
What does he mean, you think, by when he says the powerlessness of kindness, of senseless kindness, is the secret of its immortality? I mean, it
I think
sounds
it's
so good.
exactly what you referenced about 10 minutes ago. The
No, I know,
fact
but I
that
want
there
you
is...
to tease it out. What does it mean?
I think what he means by that is the fact that it seems like there are such enormous forces arrayed against all things good, forces which, when we think about them, you referenced anti-Semitism 20 minutes ago or so, when we think about them, sort of, just make us feel despair and there's nothing to be done, and the little acts that we do seem pathetic in contrast to it, right? In the Book of Shoftim, you've got civil war and you've got rape and you've got a society falling apart and you've got layered onto it famine. And one young woman says to one older woman, "I'm sticking with you. I'm not letting you go back alone." What, really? That's going to make the difference? And yeah,
Right.
that does make the difference.
So it's almost like I think what he's saying also is that there is no moment that is too dark or too awful that prevents this from happening, right? Like this kind of human gestures and choices, which do seem senseless in light, in the face of history, but part of their smallness means that they can happen everywhere at any time.
Yeah. And maybe let's expand it a bit. The contrast of the smallness can go in multiple directions. It can be that evil is so overwhelming, as Vasily Grossman mentions, but also perhaps we have an image that in order to make a difference in the world, we need to do enormous things. I've thought in the past that one of the beauties of reading Megillat Ruth on Shavuot is the contrast to Matan Torah, to the receiving of the Torah at Har Sinai. When the Torah is given, the mountain is smoking, there is thunder, there is lightning, there is the shofar, the ground is trembling, the people are terrified. It's literally an earth-shattering moment. And we place alongside it a story which couldn't be quieter. It couldn't be more pastoral. It couldn't be less earth-shattering. And yet there is such a beauty and such a power that actually you don't need the heavens to be smoking. You don't need to rock the world in order to change history.
Right. By the way, there's one more contrast that I'll name here, and I think it relates a little bit to what I know of your work, because you've been also really active, for example, in building bonds with the Druze community in Israel, And in New York, you were very involved in, supporting unhoused individuals and like building bonds with Jews and non-Jews in your neighborhood. Reading Ruth alongside, like this year, I've just been thinking so much about what it means that in the holiday in which we read about this earth-shattering revelation at Sinai, which is almost like this treasured covenant between God and the Jewish people. Then we read the Book of Ruth, in which we have Jews like Elimelech who are messing up right and left. And then we have the one Moabite, the one foreigner who comes in and she exemplifies chesed and kindness. And for me, that's almost like it's almost like a reminder to us that we are that I don't have the right words here, but that like we're supposed to live up to a certain covenant. We're not just, you know what I mean? Like we're not just, I'm gonna be a little bit facetious, like we're not just like holy or special, like we are supposed to live up to this, and that there's allies and friends along the way who can live up to this as well. And in the case of Ruth, and I think about all the individuals who have converted that I have been lucky to be part of their journeys, it's not just that she's allowed to come in from the outside to join. She literally makes the Jewish people better. Like she brings in something, like her gifts change and improve and elevate the covenant, which to me is also really powerful. And chesed is universal in that way, right? In this most particular of
Yes,
holidays
yes,
in which we talk about receiving the Torah for us, right? That's when we have Ruth, who brings us the universal model of like you said, she turns to her mother-in-law and she says, I'm sticking with you.
that's right. That's right. That's beautifully said. You mentioned about our friendships with the Druze community and our partnerships with them. The Druze actually look to the figure not of Ruth, but of Yitro, of
Right.
Moshe's Midianite father-in-law, as their sort of great
Hmm.
sort of forebear and an ancestor, which sort of fits so perfectly. Someone who is sort of on the outside and has his own identity, but also is so much a part of Am Yisrael and so committed to them. And remember that the Torah is given in Parashat Yitro. It's a story for another time, but that Yitro is placed. The story of Yitro is placed next to the giving of the Torah in the way in which the story is told in Exodus. That seems to be
Yeah.
something of this theme here, I think.
Yeah. You want to share the other source from Nachalat Yosef? Is that the name of the book?
Sure. Finishing with one beautiful idea from this work, Nachalat Yosef. The story of Ruth starts with the words Vayelech Ish, a man goes, a man leaves, speaking about Elimelech, who we've spoken about, who leaves his town of Bethlehem in the land of Israel and goes to Moab. And that phrase, Vayelech Ish, actually only appears in one other place in all of the Hebrew Bible. And it's early on in Exodus, in the book of Shemot. Vayelech Ish mi Bet Levi, v'yikach et bat Levi. A man goes from the house of Levi and takes a wife. And this is, of course, the story of Amram and Yocheved, Moshe's parents. And there is a comment of a medieval Parashan commentator called the Baal HaTurim, who notes this, that the phrase appears twice. And he says, the first one appears, Lahavi Goel Harishon, to announce the first Redeemer, in other words, Moshe. And the second one is Lahavi Goel Ha'acharon, to bring the later, the last Redeemer, referring to David HaMelech. And says our man, Nachalat Yosef, the power of this is that these two Vayelech Ishes are the opposite of one another. You might be familiar with the tradition that during the terrible Egyptian slavery, the men have given up on their wives and their relationships and the idea of bringing new life into this world. And Amram's act is a heroic act, and the Midrashim tell us that Miriam, his daughter, encouraged him. It's a heroic act to say, no, even in this darkness, I'm going to bring new life into this world. That's the first Vayelech Ish, which brings us the Goel Rishon, brings us Moshe. The second Vayelech Ish, as we've discussed at length this evening, is an act of abandonment. It's an act of despair. It's an act of giving up on Am Yisrael, an act of betrayal, and Elimelech pays the ultimate price for it. And yet, in these strange ways of providence, the twisting road, we can never know how redemption comes. That it is this act of betrayal, of leaving his people, which actually, mysteriously, bizarrely, astonishingly, is what brings this Moabite girl, Ruth, into relationship with Noami, which brings her back to Eretz Yisrael, which introduces her to Boaz, which eventually leads us to David HaMelech. Sometimes the Geula, the redemption, comes when we do all the things that we're supposed to do. But sometimes actually out of, things and approaches and mistakes and terrible tragedies, something beautiful comes when we would have least expected it.
So, Rabbi Joe, I know you have a very coherent after a 27-hour flight, but I don't want to keep you that much longer. I want to let you rest. But could you tell me with this last sentiment? It's funny. I feel like my mind and my heart are constantly in Israel, but I'm also very aware that I'm far, and that it's all coming to me through media. But these messages seem to matter to you, especially now, and especially based on living in Israel. So could you just leave us with some thoughts as to how you are taking this for you and for your community right now in terms of what it means to live in Israel at this moment in history?
I feel I can answer your question by just almost reading directly out of our discussion about Megillat. Don't read the headlines. The headlines are so depressing. And they're probably true, right? That the big picture, the politics, the politicians, there is so much pain and despair involved in that. But turn away your head from the macro to the micro. If you can't come and be in Israel, you can join our WhatsApp group and see it from there.
I was special. Only I got to be in the WhatsApp group.
No, it's only you. On the micro level, the people are amazing, and I mean the whole people. That when you get to know Am Yisrael, and I love Am Yisrael world over. It's not a monopoly on Israeli society, but certainly my experience has been and continues to be that people from different parts of Israeli society who I never would have met were it not for the tumultuous events of the last 18 months and the relationships that they have with other people who they never would have met are the most inspiring and beautiful things, be that soldiers from such different backgrounds who serve with one another, be it those who have been who were evacuated from the north or the south, who make new relationships in the places where they were evacuated to and then take them back when they return to their homes, whether it be our appreciation for the astonishing amount that Druze and Bedouin have given to protect Medinat Yisrael over the last year and a half. I'm filled with awe about it. I feel that we could get rid of every single politician and fill the Knesset multiple times over with incredible people who we have met throughout. So I look at Megillat Ruth and I read it as a template for what can be of coming out of a dark and despairing moment into something brighter, and also as a tefillah that should be our story as well.
It's a beautiful prayer. Thank you so much. Thank you for teaching us this Torah from Tel Aviv, but from South Africa. But really, it's a Torah. There's a term. We talk about Torah Eretz Israel. It's like it's not just learning Torah and Jewish wisdom, but it's refracted through in this case, the experiences and the wisdom of living in Israel right now. So thank you so
Well,
much.
Mijal, thank you for your friendship, for your chavruta, for the incredible and astonishing work that you are doing from New York, and it fills me only with joy and pride to watch you going from strength to strength and amassing more and more students in person and virtually through lots of likes and viral clips which are doing huge things. And I ask for mechila for what I said earlier, which has some very big exceptions to it, which none bigger than yourself.
No need. No need. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And wishing everyone a happy Shavuot. Chag Sameach.
Like some